Very concerning stuff, Kyle. Incredibly concerning. DarbyCast Wildcard Friday. Kyle and I share calendars to better coordinate the show. This is a new development, but Kyle, your lack of follow-through has been reasonably pronounced. Accountability, right? But Kyle, I'm going to tell people what I saw on your calendar. You had a whole day, time blocked out from start to finish with the activity of oppressing women. And I'm just supposed to believe that that's a joke? Why would anybody joke about that, Kyle? Don't you know how life used to be for women in the 50s? Haven't you heard popular history? Let me walk you through a woman's day in the 1950s. Okay, Kyle. And you know what, Kyle? We're all going on this journey together. So everybody listening to this, place yourself in a very fancy set of clothes. If you're a guy, it's a 3-piece suit with a tasteful hat. You don't look like some pervert. You look like a classy individual. Ladies, a dress with some white gloves. And now that you're imagining yourself in really classy attire, join me aboard the DarbyCast Express. Now, the DarbyCast Express is somewhat like the Hogwarts Express in that it's a powerful magical train. But unlike the Hogwarts Express, we will not be going off to practice fucking witchcraft. Okay, Kyle, we are going to learn things. The DarbyCast Express is an engineering marvel that has technology that is appropriate and some technology that's inappropriate. And what does that look like? I don't know. You tell me. We all have big imaginations. Otherwise, you don't belong on the train, and you should be turning off the podcast immediately, if not sooner. If you have a stunted imagination, my goodness, get the hell off this train. But we're all looking good. Let's refocus. We are all looking pretty A+, very classy. And as most of the longtime listeners of the DarbyCast know, the DarbyCast Express is powered by a combination of truth and imagination. Very powerful when combined in a 50-50 blend. An explosive fuel source to propel us, sometimes violently, towards the things that matter. Kyle, women in the 1950s were treated like garbage. You know what? Pause the imagination train because I'm just going to tell it like it is. Women named Cassandra would wake up on the wrong side of the bed but the right side of history, and then immediately their husbands, all named Frank Davenport, would beat the living shit out of them. That was every day. We don't even need an imagination train for this, Kyle, because I've been watching some CNN recently and History Channel and other stuff. I picked up a book called Why Men Are Garbage and They've Always Hated Chicks. Very insightful. That's the story of men and women for all of time. It's that guys named Frank just get tanked and then they beat the crap out of their chicks. And they're like, yeah, I hate you. That's it, Kyle. Do you understand how bad women had it before they could ascend to greatness at Colgate Toothpaste Corporate? Before they had to work 70 hours a week and close a bunch of deals? That sounds terrible, Kyle. You know how awful that sounds, Kyle? Not being able to make PowerPoint presentations that nobody really pays attention to? Really off-putting. Kyle, we got to celebrate feminism and all that it's done to get women where they deserve to be. You know how terrible it probably was, Kyle, when women didn't have to think about fringe political issues and debate political issues at random dinners? Think about how terrible it was for women, okay, before they could feel empowered in combat roles. go get their heads blown off by grenades. I don't even want to think about a future so oppressive, or chicks couldn't do that. Yeah, Kyle, just have a seat on the DarbyCast Express and we are keeping it parked in the station because I got some shit to say before we go back. If we go back at all, Kyle, I just need to tell you how it is. Do you know how restrictive it was before women could destroy children in their wombs and vacuum it out and throw it in a trash can? Do you know how misogynistic it was before women could rack up a body count over 100? Bet you don't. You're all jokes. Mr. I'm oppressing women all day on the calendar. Ha, fucking ha, Kyle. I don't find it funny at all. My views have changed because I read the right stuff and I listen to the right sources. Think about how terrible it was, Kyle. Before you make a joke again about something so serious, think about how terrible it was before women had to go into the office. Think about how terrible it must have been for women in the past to have to spend time with their children and not have their offspring raised by randoms from third world countries that don't speak fluent English. This train's not leaving the station, Kyle, because I got this one covered. Think about how evil it was, downright sinister, if we're being forthright, that women couldn't pass their kids off to predators to confuse the kids about everything about themselves. It's a world I don't want to live in. But that was how it was going in the 50s. You couldn't just take your kids to public school and trust that they were going to learn about gender fluidity and why that's all pretty important. Okay. You know what else was oppressive and super twisted, Kyle? Is when women had children in their years of peak fertility rather than being able to kick the can down the road so they could make some major decisions in the boardroom for Colgate toothpaste. Sure, a lot of gals have goofy pregnancies now, some ending in things that aren't so pleasant, but you know what they got in exchange for that? Starbucks. Daily, if they want it, because of their wages. Kyle. Now that's freedom. That is freedom. I guess you're anti-freedom. You like oppressing women or even joking about it, Kyle. My goodness. Think about how oppressive the 50s, 60s, 70s really were. Women had no real ability to get raped by immigrants. Is that a reality even worth entertaining, Kyle? Do you understand the progress that we've made, Kyle? Glass ceiling, we've been tapping on it, and I get the sense it's about to burst. Shards of glass everywhere, but in a positive way. Let's just face the facts, okay, Kyle? And by the facts, I mean the ones that I'm espousing, and not anything that counters that, because anything that counters what I'm saying is definitionally bigotry. Okay, you get it. And if you don't, boom, gotcha, you're a bigot. But I was checking out a pretty cool video that was put out by Wesleyan College. Total troop of academics. Academic thought leaders through and through. They get it, okay? But I was watching this video that had infographics, and I'm going to explain to you what I discovered. Did you know that in the 1950s, on average, men drank 1.5 gallons of whiskey every day before using their wives as punching bags and insisting that the children watched? That's what was really going on in the States. Men would have tons of affairs and then they would beat up their wives. That was what was happening all across society. every neighborhood, every woman was just walking around with two black eyes, and they had to lie to each other all the time and say, oh, I got hit by a baseball. Baseball, as a sport, was actually invented in the 1950s to cover up domestic abuse. Kyle, this is what it said in the presentation, and I can't see any other possible explanation. Modern society rocks for women, right? Where they have to go to work every day. I'm just glad we're not living in those crazy times when women had to put up with things that were like so negative. Cooking, spending time with kids, doing community building activities. Yuck, right? I'm really sorry. Let me just take a time out. I'm really sorry that I got people excited for the DarbyCast Express train of imagination and that we were just going to go on a ride. But I think I got this one covered, Kyle. I'm doing a great job. Yeah, you can't joke about oppressing women. You just can't. Think about in the 1950s how destructive it was before women could just get divorced for no reason and just opt out and take half the guy's stuff, even though nothing was really wrong. Check that. All the guys were beating the hell out of the chicks. Everything was wrong. Kyle, divorce is awesome and empowering now, Kyle. I don't know if you knew that. And it's good for kids. It's A+ for everybody. Also society. It's A+ for society. Can you imagine how crazy the 1950s were before we had smartphones, where women couldn't just like take pictures of their buttholes and post it online? That was slavery, Kyle. That's definition slavery, pretty much. Yeah, in the past, men were just keeping women down from doing all the right things. But now, Kyle, that oppression has all stopped. Women are freer than they've ever been. Think about this. In the 50s, women couldn't wake up, smoke pot, and blast themselves with a vibrator. What was that even about? Women didn't have robust vibrator collections. Pretty sexist, if you ask me. But now we've got all this cool tech, and women have great lives full of avocado toast, mimosas, hey, and tons of other stuff. You know, in the 50s, it was tricky for gals to go to their local college and get a degree in who gives a fuck studies and become addicted to alcohol and maybe cocaine. What a busted, broken system, Kyle. There's some people who look back at decades past in the United States and say that women and men had pretty cool things going on. Those people are evil, Kyle. And people who joke about the oppression of women, like yourself, deserve to be in trouble in a big way. You know what used to happen in the 1950s, Kyle? If a woman didn't make a good enough dinner, Frank Davenport beating the hell out of her. If she didn't make cookies that were up to the standard, Frank Davenport, all the Frank Davenports used to just throw all the Cassandras down flights of stairs. Because that's what mattered to guys back then. He said, give me a good meatloaf, Cassandra, or I'm going to beat you to within an inch of your life. That was the culture, Kyle. Y'all know it's true. People wouldn't lie about the nature of reality from decades past, would they? No chance. No way. You know, in the 1950s, it was probably pretty rare for a woman to step in a pile of human feces and then fall into a heap of used needles in a city. That's the kind of stuff that builds character. And that's why we have so many empowered, wacky chicks these days. Well, one of the reasons, I suppose, Kyle. But Kyle, you're a piece of shit. That's what this episode's really about. Kyle, the 1950s was hell for women. And it was because of jerks like you, Kyle, and your backward sensibilities, making blanket assumptions that most gals prefer spending time with their families and their children over going to raves. You're wrong, Kyle. Rave or die. That's what most gals want to do. When they're on their commute to a corporate office, you know what they think to themselves, Kyle? In the modern age, in this age of enlightenment and freedom, they think to themselves, gosh, I love my job, but I also love raves and grinding on strangers. Women in the 50s didn't even have that opportunity. They didn't even understand the possibilities. The path of true fulfillment, Kyle, for everybody can be found within the corporate world, especially women. But also guys, Kyle, I would encourage you to go out and work for a corporation because it's amazing. Kyle, just face it. Women would rather work just under part-time hours as not to get benefits at a coffee shop owned by a multinational conglomerate than have a family. That's always been the case, Kyle. That's always been the case. And now they've got the opportunity to pursue that. Unless guys like you, jokesters, come in and start saying, I'm going to oppress women. Not funny, Kyle. It's true. All throughout history and Western civilization, the biggest oppressors of women have been individual men who want to throw them in mud puddles and rub their face in the dirt and say, I hate you. All the major institutions that we have now, Kyle, are for women's benefit. And the cultural trends targeted at women are for their benefit. How could it not be the case? All of our leaders are ethical and morally upstanding. That's just how leaders are, Kyle. Don't be so naive. Independent, make money, throw your hands up at me. Kyle, that's what's really going on. Do you know how many women in the 1950s would have killed to get involved in environmental issues? So much more important than being connected with their friends and neighbors. It always has been, but now we're fully seeing it. You know what women couldn't do in the 1950s, Kyle? Give their kids experimental medicine with unknown side effects that could really harm them in both the short and the long term. Where was that? Where was that? What an awful time to be alive, to be an American. Picture this, Kyle. You're a gal in the 1950s and you open a book and then you get punched in the face by your brother. That happened all the time in every family. That's what it was like. Nothing more oppressive than being a stay-at-home mom who loves her kids. So disgusting when you think about it. So hateful. Overall, women internalized that hate back then, but they didn't realize they were victims of their own circumstance and the patriarchy, a violent and malevolent institution quietly agreed upon by men everywhere. Men would high-five in the streets and say, I'm going home to beat my wife after drinking 1.5 gallons of gin. That was the norm, Kyle. That was totally the norm. Let me give you another for instance, Kyle. I'm nowhere near done. How goofy do you think it was back then when gals didn't have access to loads of psychotropic medications prescribed by doctors who know nothing about them and don't do a whole lot of follow-up? Or imagine how oppressive it was for the kids who couldn't ingest a steady supply of pharmaceutical-grade meth on a regular basis. Kids struggled too, Kyle. Damn it, right? Back then in the 50s, women weren't allowed to be race car drivers. And that basically shatters just about 80% of girls' realities, right? Women, from the beginning of time, from what I understand about my liberal arts education, Kyle, want to be high-octane gearheads. As soon as the combustion engine was involved, Kyle, women wanted to race. You know, Kyle, if it weren't for people like you, I think we'd be living in a utopia. There's still so much work to be done. From what I know about most women, they want equality in all jobs. And we're getting closer to that. In the 50s, good luck being a garbage woman. In the 50s, good luck driving a bulldozer. In the 50s, good luck working on septic tanks. But now, those lanes are open. So don't get in the way of progress, Kyle. Don't you dare. In the 50s, women couldn't be railway workers, a job that most gals are perfectly capable of and want to do. I'm still just hung up on combat roles and how it's taken us this long to get women into the military. Imagine in the 1950s that your name's Cassandra, all you want to do is drive a tank and kill bad guys, which a ton of women did. But you were oppressed by your husband, who said, no, Cassandra, if you're out driving a tank, who will be my human punching bag when I get wasted? These are the hard things to examine, Kyle. Now that we've fully recognized that men and women are the exact same, have all the same interests and capabilities, Kyle, you can see how stupid the 50s might have seemed. Especially when you've got an educated beast like myself to correct the wrongs of a corrupt empire. What sounds better, Kyle, for most women? Going out and trick-or-treating with their kids? Or using ChatGPT to synthesize data on a spreadsheet? Option 2, quite obviously, Kyle. Women love politics, Kyle. That's another thing. In the 50s, women were not super politically active, but now they get to read bills on measures. That's freedom, Kyle. You know, in a lot of areas, kids are falling behind in their academics, but I think that's a pretty small price to pay for chicks finally getting to be themselves and be out of the house and do things right. Go to trivia night, maybe? Where was that in the 50s? Gals were not going to trivia night. Tell you that much. What a bleak wasteland of a culture that was. Gals had no meaningful opportunities. They were getting beat up all the time. And the state wasn't good enough about having their back. We're lucky now, Kyle, that we have a government, financial, and cultural apparatus that's pushing women on the paths that they've always dreamed of. Fighter pilots, Kyle? That's where most chicks have wanted to go since they saw an airplane. They say, I want to murder insurgents with that. Wake up, Kyle. Those are the facts. Kids don't need moms. What's going to benefit a kid more in the long term, Kyle? How about I just pose this question to you? And you're probably going to get it wrong. Would kids be better off with a mom who was active and involved, or one who was good at CrossFit and going to competitions pretty frequently? Checkmate, Kyle. Check fucking mate. At some point in the future, we may take the train out for a spin, Kyle. We might take the train out of the station, the DarbyCast Express. It's an incredible tool. And I want to thank everybody who got dressed up to board the train and apologize for not giving you the journey that you expected. Instead, we're actually having a much more thoughtful lecture, check that, discussion, on what the important things are. Okay? So if you're angry for not going to the destination that you were promised, why don't you just think about women in the 50s? And if anybody has anything negative to say about this, you hate women, obviously, and you want to beat them violently. That's what we all know now. If you are unwilling to buy into the rich history that I am illustrating, it's probably because you're a dangerous chauvinist. And some women might actually fall into that category as well, Kyle. Kyle, you're a dangerous chauvinist because you joke about oppression. How dare you try to make light of anything, Kyle? You cannot do that. That's not okay. Good thing you didn't have other things written on your calendar. Oppress blank. Kyle, we all know that oppression comes not from institutions. It comes from individuals like yourself, jokesters, jesters. Kyle, if a joke like that was told to a group of guys, I bet you they would all go home and start beating women, their moms, their sisters, their wives, because that's what happens. If we allow any ideas that run contrary to mainstream thought to proliferate, then we're back in 1.5 gallons a day of whiskey and women being hung upside down from their ankles and dunked in latrines. Kyle, go up to any senior citizen woman today who is alive in these backwards and twisted times. Ask them what their life was like. I can almost guarantee you they're going to say a couple things. Anytime I tried to read a book, men beat me. Anytime I wanted to ascend the hierarchy at a railway company, I was denied access. And if I overcooked anything, I got quote unquote hit by a baseball. Go up to a gal today and just ask her, Kyle, is baseball even real? They're committed to the lie. They'll tell you that it is. But we know the truth. All women secretly hated their lives back then. And anybody who doesn't think so is so inappropriate. All women hated their lives back then. I'm telling you, find any older gal. Ask her about her life. Ask her about her mother's life and say, how'd you make it through? And because they were victims of abuse and they have Stockholm syndrome, they're going to say, survive what? And then you say, being denied all the opportunities to work at steel mills. And then their eyes are going to light up. And undoubtedly, they're going to say, how did you know about the quiet life of desperation that I was living? All I wanted to do was smelt. But instead, I got railroaded into having a family. What a prison. Kyle, what an absolute Alcatraz as a metaphor. Men have always hated women, Kyle, historically and now. When most guys see a woman, they just want to knock them over and start elbowing them in the face. Do you know how much men hate women overall? A ton. Open and check case. Just face it, Kyle. Women had it terrible in the past, and now things are great for women. Look at how happy women are these days, Kyle. Haven't you noticed? Women would rather own designer handbags than have kids. For the most part. There's some twisted Christian chicks who think that having kids is important. But again, they've just internalized patriarchy and oppression. Kyle, feminism is about choices. I want you to know that. And now women have more choices than ever about what they can do except for having a family, because it's like pretty cost prohibitive. But remember, the family, evil, and pretty much a ruse for guys to have a live-in Wing Chun dummy to practice the punches and the kicks. Corporations are doing all the right things, Kyle. So is our government. Same with the tech companies. They're helping gals realize that men hate them and that the only way to ever feel whole and complete is to make good money and party all the time. Kyle, the 50s were just not okay. I hope that everybody listening to this feels super educated, because now you know what's really going on. And that women have had it rough and that men hate you. If you're a gal listening to this, consider yourself keyed in to the reality of life. Men hate women and want to deny them opportunities left and right. And some men are so evil that they'll even put it on their schedule. Kyle, you need to understand all of this, gang. Super critical. But that's DarbyCast Wildcard Friday.